Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Natalie Portman. Seriously, there is no Todd and Wes. It's been her the whole time. She's just that good. Let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome everybody to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Surfer Boy Pizza. Catch waves of pepperoni and mozzarella delivered right to your door. Surfs up at Surfer Boy Pizza. Welcome everybody to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And we're filmmakers, writers, actors, a producer, one willing and one unwilling. And we bring all of that, kind of historical insight into the filmmaking process to look at films and try to analyze them, see what we can learn about the filmmaking process and movies at large, and just little fun tidbits here and there. One of the fun things about that is we get things wrong. And I like that we're not afraid to get things wrong, because it's, at the end of the day, it's art, and we're just kind of giving it our pass. Just because, we more or less do this for a living. We haven't made a movie for a living, at least not in the capacity of what we're discussing. Like, I don't know about you. I've been in like films before as an actor, but I haven't like shot my own movie. I haven't outside of like a short film, like a feature length. We haven't done any feature length work for the most part yet. But, doesn't mean that we're right or wrong just because of, our experience. It's, at the end of the day, I think what we do best is we just kind of put on our hat and analyze from what the story is telling us, what we know about filmmaking, cinematography, writing, best practices, things we've learned along the way. But at the end of the day, there's that Dunning-Kruger effect that is really interesting. I feel like maybe, I don't know about you, but I think the more I learn, the more I feel like I don't know anything. And that's the other half that people don't usually talk about with the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is the idea that the less you know about something, the more you act in confidence that you know everything about it. So like if I were to sit here and talk about like birds and bird watching, I could sound really competent without knowing anything about it, right. Because right. I maybe took some intro course, or I read a blurb on whatever. And so there's always this impact of how much do you really know versus how much do you actually know? Because the more I feel like you get to know something, the more possibilities there are. I think like there's just times I know that I skim through things instead of like taking a minute to really flesh out an idea that I'm having. And I realized this editing last week's episode, Return of the King, where I skimmed through this idea of the 180 rule and how it was being applied in certain ways, in interesting ways. And it probably came off as more like absolutist than I intended it, because I was just like, oh, this is an interesting idea that I think they're playing with. And the 180 rule, when you break it, gives an interesting emotional feeling to the viewer that's, trying to translate into a story moment. Something in the story is shifting. And there was a couple of moments in Return of the King that I was like, oh, I think they're incorporating this idea without moving the camera. And I didn't really flesh out some of those things. But you have to make your peace with imperfect delivery on these things, because you and I may take notes and I may have notes, but we spend as little time as possible making this thing, just because I think, I don't know about you, but I like the conversation that comes out of it. And I like being open to new possibilities, but also don't want to spend, 50 hours of my week being precise. I don't know. What do you make of all that garbled nonsense?
No, I think it's a great lead into this film, actually, because we're gonna say we're gonna have our opinions, and we're gonna say some things, and I don't necessarily know that they are correct. But the point is also that, like, at least when you're talking about interpretation, that it comes from a real place of like a real initial feeling that you had. And yeah, when it comes to the podcast, also, I would say, perfection is the enemy of good, which means essentially, like, to get that last 15% of perfection, it is unsurmountably a lot more time, right? And effort. So I think that doing our best with what we can is the way to go, right? So like we'll be 85% on this, for the foreseeable future, I would say. I mean, that being said, I also think that this is a very honest discussion that we always have. We come into you come to it with a lot of notes. You put a ton of time into this and a ton of effort. And I mean, I put some effort in, but I think that the point is that we come at it from the way we like to talk about movies and to digest movies. We talk about it all the time that even though we might be wrong or not wrong, even though we might have get some things, not exactly the way the filmmaker had intended, doesn't mean that it is wrong, because it was the way that we ingested it, right? Maybe on that day we were having a bad day, and so we didn't get something that we should have maybe gotten on a second viewing or something like that. And that's a personal thing that I think everybody experiences when they go to when you watch a movie. Sometimes you're in the mood for a movie like Men, and sometimes you are not. And it really depends on how, where you are when you digest it too. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. And I think that the other thing that we do is we don't ever really destroy films. And I love that about this. I've talked to so many people about this podcast, and the thing that I'm most proud of about it, or one of the things, is that we honor the art of making movies, or just making anything in general. Like having the balls to say, I'm going to write something, and then I'm going to put a lot of money and time and effort behind it. And if it turns out like shit, you know what? I did my very best. That is 90% more than most people will ever do. And so I don't think that we'll ever go through a movie and just completely tear it apart. We might make fun of it in points, and we might point out bad decisions and stuff that we would have done differently. But like you said, the more we learn about filmmaking, the more we understand that there are no rules. There are rules, and then when you understand them, you can learn how to break them in a way that, might be beneficial to the story or not.
Absolutely. And well said. I think the nice part, God, here we go again. The nice part about art is the level of subjectivity that comes along with it, right? If I paint, a horse, and then I show it to you and you see a dog, are you wrong? Just because my intention was to do a thing doesn't mean I accomplished that intention. And so I am exceedingly less and less concerned with reading up on what an artist intended. I don't really care. I'm more and more concerned with what did they convey, what landed. I think that's the more important part, especially for me as a filmmaker, and as an artist. I can't get too caught up in, oh, this is what they intended, therefore this is what I take away. I have to be more thinking about, what did I take away so that I can improve my art in order to get my intentions across? Because if you had an intention that didn't land, I would say that's your failure as an artist, not the fact that you made something that didn't live up to your own expectations. The question is, did you have a message? And if not, that's fine too. But I think most artists, have a message or a feeling that they're trying to convey. And if you don't convey those things, those are the things I think we as artists want to improve on. So I
wanted to expound upon that just for a second. So this is an interesting question that I have for you then. So as a filmmaker, as a writer, you're trying to get an intention across, obviously, but how do you feel if someone walks away from something that you made with a different result as a film? Because you're coming from it right now, you're talking from a viewer, but from a filmmaker point of view, how would you feel if you painted a horse and someone saw a dog? How would that make you feel? I mean, I guess it depends on the project, right? Like if you're wanting it to be ambiguous, that's one thing. But so anyway, yeah,
that's a good question. I've had that happen before, not a ton, but a couple times, and both. It's both things. It's weird because on the one hand, there is a frustration with it. Like, damn it, I didn't tell my story properly. But there's this other part of me that's like, man, that was really cool. Like, that isn't at all what I was thinking when I wrote this. And whenever I, shot this and when I edited this, I thought I was communicating X. And I realized where I messed up along the way for them to come away with, R. Like, I just completely, different thing. And it's an interesting feeling. It doesn't feel necessarily bad all the way through because you're like, oh, how did they arrive at that? And then I start thinking about like, where did they get that impression? And I guess it does circle back to me feeling like a failure as a storyteller. But there is that part of me that's like, man, but they were connecting. There's these two parts of our beings that were connecting with each other. There's this part of me that they connected with, that connected with this part of them. And even though it wasn't my intention, there was still a connection there. And that's still valid. The fact that they walked away remembering this other part of their life or this other feeling that they've had in their life, that's a still nice feeling. That's a cool feeling to think, maybe they didn't see what I wanted them to see, but they saw something else in themselves. And that's pretty cool. That's still satisfying in a completely different way. Though it would have been more satisfying if the intention would have been more ambiguous in nature. Yeah, that's a fun question, man. Nice.
That is a fun question. And like I was saying, I think it evolves with the type of project you're working on. Project like Men might be, I mean, you have to make a movie like this knowing that people are not going to understand it the way that you're trying to convey it. There's no way that a lot of people, maybe even if most people do, there's going to be a ton of people that do not. And you have to be okay with that. And I think probably Alex Garland is okay with that. But a movie like, I don't know, Infinity War, you kind of, it's kind of more on the nose, right? Yeah. If people don't get it, it's definitely your fault. And that might be a bad example because that's still pretty deep and heavy. Yeah. So, but anyway.
Sure. Nice.
At least for my 9-year-old. So anyway, yeah. So today we are, if you haven't gotten it yet, today we're covering Alex Garland's Men, which I think is just came out of theaters. I think I saw it got the last showing in theater. So like the very last one. So if you haven't seen it, please pause the episode and wait for it to go streaming or something. I don't know, because we're going to spoil a lot of stuff.
For sure. We're going to briefly touch on cinematography. One of the ways they show disconnect through framing. We'll also look very heavily into the story and writing, some of the lessons that they're trying to get at in the film, as well as the symbolism and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a very quick synopsis of the film. A young woman goes on a solo vacation to the English countryside following the death of her ex-husband. It's written and directed by Alex Garland, cinematography by Rob Hardy, starring Jessie Buckley as Harper, Rory Kinnear as Geoffrey, Paapa Essiedu as James, and Gayle Rankin as Riley. I don't know how to say that last name.
Yeah.
Essiedu.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Until you give your love, there's nothing more that we can do.
Apple from the garden?
Yeah, it was delicious.
No. Mustn't do that. Forbidden fruit.
Oh, God, sorry,
I'm joking.
Oh.
You're tormented.
It feels more like...
Haunted.
Yeah. Something happened. My husband went upstairs to our balcony and let himself go.
You must wonder why you drove him to it.
Why? I didn't drive him to it.
I thought it'd be true. But if you had given him the chance to apologize, he'd still be alive.
What? A man followed me out of the woods. He was stalking me.
What makes you say that?
I saw him twice.
Twice. I don't know if he saw you once.
Want to play a game? You hide, I'll seek.
You must feel an awful sense of guilt.
Stay away from me. Why are you doing that? What are you?
So I want to hear all the things, but I think it's pretty easy to ask whether or not you like this one. But to me, I think more important is how you felt, while watching it. And so, yeah, tell me about your experience with this thing.
Yeah, I'm glad that you actually distinguished the two of like if I liked it or how I felt, because I felt gross the whole time. I don't necessarily know that was the intention. I think probably women have a different experience in this film than men, and I think that's the point, right? I mean, hopefully that's the point, because that's how I felt. So I think the whole time I felt icky and awkward, and here's a problem that I have with it. Okay, I'm totally fine with how I felt in the film. I'm totally fine with feeling icky the whole time. I think that was the point, and I think Alex Garland's point here, in a way, might be to address to men how women feel a lot, right? Can't go on walks by themselves without fear of this, fear of, being attacked, and there's always naked men chasing them, or like, there's the sexual aspect, there's so, and if that's the case, that definitely came across. The problem that I have, if it's any more than that, if the point is to make, is to make the feeling a little bit more ingrained in men, is that like there is this whole kind of I don't know, almost anti-man sentiment that's going around in society, right? And I understand the point. I understand the point, and that all of these things need to be addressed. But I just feel a little bit like it's the word man feels very much like a bad word to me, and I don't think it's necessarily something that has been part of my experience. I just feel like there's a lot going around it's if you're a guy, you're inherently bad, and that's not what I felt like in the movie, but it's what I felt like after the movie, if that makes sense. I felt like ashamed to be a dude, even though I've never done any of these things. I've never like any of them, and maybe there are people that would say, no, that's not true. I'm sure you probably have, and you don't even know it. No, I've never done any of these things. Or like even, thought I've made anybody feel like this, but it was really good. I'm trying to put this into words. It was really good at making me feel what women probably feel on a daily basis, and making me feel like total shit because of it.
Good.
And I hope,
Good.
yeah. And I hope that actually like resonates in a way that, makes more misogynistic people, whether male or female, understand that and respond in kind within society and their decisions and their actions. But I just felt a little bit like I was berated the whole time, because I think that he did a good thing, a really interesting good thing by making all the men played by one man. Rory Kinnear is incredible in this movie. Like, actually, I don't even I have no idea how he did what he did. but it was excellently acted by him and Jessie, Buckley. Like I have no words for how amazing the masterclass they put on was. I thought it was brilliantly directed. I thought the scenes and the shots and cinematography were amazing. The tunnel shot is the best shot in the whole movie to me, where she blocks the other end of the tunnel, so it just looks like a hole of black. And that was in the trailer. And the whole time she's standing in there and she's saying the ha 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 and listening to the echo and walking further in. I just kept saying, "Don't go in, don't go in, don't go in, don't go in." And then the guy standing up at the other end was just the creepiest thing ever. And so I thought, creepy wise, I thought it was really good. I just felt very much, and whatever, people are going to listen to this and they're going to say, "Oh, you're triggered," and fine, I'm triggered. But I felt attacked, in a way. And I think that's okay. I'm not saying that that's bad.
Yeah.
I think it's necessary and okay. I'm just saying, I don't think I was in the right headspace at the time to see this. I had to see it. It was the last opportunity that I had before it went out of theaters. I wanted to see it on a big screen. I love Alex Garland. I think I wasn't in the right mindset, but I think that the execution was brilliant. I think that the storytelling was brilliant. The ending, we'll get to that. I think we should talk about that in its own kind of like
Agreed
thing later. But the feeling I had, to answer your question in a long way, was I felt intrigued and scared and tense the entire time, and then really dirty after. So if that's what he was getting at, then kudos to you, Alex. You killed it. So I hope I didn't trigger anybody, honestly, but like that was kind of my initial takeaway.
Yeah. I mean, I get what you mean. I have friends on Instagram, whatever, and sometimes they just post a slew of things that does come off as more anti-guy than like drilling down and specifying, here's the things that we need to change. It just becomes this kind of blanketed, attack. And it can be a little gross because on the one hand, I don't think you or I are going to disagree that we still have a lot of room to grow in terms of culturally, kind of these patriarchal structures, whatever, however you want to frame that discussion, we would agree that there's leaps and bounds still, ready to be made. But there does seem to be this kind of gross line that people cross into where it's just, blanket condemnation. It's like, just because a guy does something doesn't make it bad. And just because a woman does something doesn't make it good. Like,
right.
People are probably sick to death of me saying this, but we're all individuals, and we can both address some of the systemic things that are happening culturally without, forgetting that at the end of the day, there's still individuals involved, and not to forget to address people on their individual, circumstances and realities. I'll try not to go any deeper on that level. But for me, I think slightly different response, slightly the same. I definitely felt gross. I just felt more confused because I walk in, I didn't really know what I was walking into. I saw brief glimpses of the trailer, but all I knew was Alex Garland had a new movie out. And so it's going to be about men. And I already got the tone of it, right? In terms of this is going to be a referendum on men, which is cool. Fine. Like I'm all for it. And then somewhere, towards the end of the film, I was like, I feel like Alex Garland is really frustrated with Hollywood. This felt like an outlash. Like he was just really frustrated with making brilliant work and not getting recognized, right? Imagine you put out Ex Machina, which to me is one of the better sci-fi films of the past 20 years, at a minimum. And no one watched it, let alone, got any awards recognition like it should have, because science fiction generally is not respected as a genre in the award season. And so I think it's just years. And then he puts out Devs. And if you walk up to anyone who watches a lot of TV and say, did you see Devs? They're going to be like, what is that? They're not. Yeah. And imagine putting out some really thoughtful, great sci-fi and no one's watching it. And it's just like, I felt like this was him turning the table up, just saying, okay, y'all want to feel something? I'm going to make you feel something, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And I felt like he designed this to create a talking piece that when you get to that end sequence that we'll go into detail later, it's designed to be, oh my God, have you seen X? Have you seen Men? You got to watch it. It's so weird. I don't know if you'll like it, but it's crazy. And I felt like that was kind of him trying to alienate and punish the audience out of his own frustrations in the system. And A24 is the perfect partner for that because they are the art house, studio now. Even though for a while they started as a distributor, they've gotten way more into the production side of things. And so they're still, I guess, a little on the indie side, certainly in terms of story type, but in terms of like financing, I think they're still more independent, but they're getting to the point where I'd put them in the class of like Legendary and some of these others. But that was how I felt. As I was like, I kind of get what you're doing, because, and maybe it's me projecting, because I'm like, that's kind of how I'm designing some of my stories now. I just want to fucking, take the axe to the audience and say, how does that feel? How do you feel now? Like, remember me. You just want to shake them. Remember me. And yeah, I think with that, it's a lot easier to process this for me with that kind of mindset of this was born out of frustration, not because he knew precisely what he wanted to say and precisely what he wanted to communicate. He just wanted to punch you in the face one good time. And now I'll go back to my more thoughtful, very carefully constructed puzzle pieces. What do you think of that? What do you think of that? Even if I'm wrong. And he was like, no, I've been thinking about this for the last 40 years. As an approach, how do you feel about just, I want to punish the audience?
No, I think honestly, that makes me like the movie more. I'm really glad you said that, because I have that feeling when it comes to, like, if I'm making music or something. Sometimes I'm just making something like, oh God, I just don't want to do this, and I'll make something completely different, and it feels so much better to just do it, like almost like vomit creativity. Whatever happens. It also reminded me of the final line of the film that her husband says sitting on the couch, and which is almost like a
oh shit, yeah.
It almost makes up for all of everything else that happens earlier in the movie, like all the terrible men, or the terrible man that plays all all of Rory Kinnear's characters are awful in every single, whether they're a child, whether they're a priest, whether they're, a nice guy who's the owner of the house, whether it's the bartender, whatever. They're all terrible. But the last line of the film, when her husband's sitting on the couch and just says, I just wanted you to love me, or something like that.
Yeah, he says, this is what you did. And she just looks at him and asks, what do you want from me? And he just says, your love.
Yeah. And so I felt like just that is a shows a symptom, right? That I think that a lot of men have that we don't talk about, which is we never say what we actually want, because what we actually want makes us very vulnerable. And if it really is your love, a lot of times it manifests itself in other ways, right? So if your love language is like physical touch, then really it comes off as, I just want sex, right? Or if it's things, really what it comes off as like demanding of money or something like that, or like, you work too much or something. But really at its heart, we're all little boys wanting mommy to love us. And that's just the last line. Like, when I'm not counting the you did this, because that's very he blames her, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just that last line, it spoke to me in a way that made me think, oh, he's just a child, right? He's still a child, and he hasn't grown up, and he hasn't he's not being empathetic, and he's just very like me, which makes it seem like a symptom. So, but yeah, looking at it that way actually makes me like the film a little bit better.
Yeah, that's a really interesting connection that I didn't make. Connecting him making this out of frustration, possibly, this is my interpretation, but
I like it.
And then adding on to that, like the audience asking him after going through this whole experience, the audience asking him, what do you want from me? And him as a creator just saying, I want your love. Like, that's a really fun interpretation. That's absolutely what I'm walking away with from this movie.
No, that blends really well with your statement of him being frustrated, right?
For sure.
And it's like a love letter to the audience. Or an ultimatum.
Yeah, because I just see Alex Garland as this incredibly thoughtful. He's my favorite writer. And I was frustrated watching this because I walk into certain films looking to like it. And sometimes I will contort myself into trying to like it, even though in my heart I'm like, you don't like this, Wes. And so I don't like this movie. And it took me a little while after watching it to, kind of come to grips to that. But whether I'm sitting through an Alex Garland film or Danny Boyle or Christopher Nolan, my intention is walking in, I'm going to enjoy this because these are my favorite creators. And then they have to work at making me not like it because I go in with so much goodwill. And maybe that's even poisoning the tree there, because I go in anticipating greatness, and there's only so many inceptions a human being can come up with. How many times can you create 28 Days Later or Sunshine, which I think Sunshine is the best analog to this film based on some of the conversation within it. But you only have so many of those in you as a human being, although I guess Shakespeare might disagree. But yeah, I don't know, man. I think I'll dive into some of these notes and you jump in and do your thing. Cinematography, this is brief, but one of the things I liked was the flashback conversation with James in the bedroom. We're sitting there and we're listening to them argue, and he starts threatening her with suicide. He's like, I'm going to kill myself. That's what you're going to do to me. And you got to live with it, right? There's just no ownership at all. And she's just freaking out, rightly so. Like, what are you saying? You can't put that on me. And the way they're shooting this is through these clean singles. So a clean single is when you're framing one person without the other person in the frame. So even though there's two of them in the room, whenever we're looking at Harper, we're only looking at Harper. We don't see like a little bit of shoulder from James. And likewise, when we're looking at James, we don't see any like pieces of Harper within the frame. So that's a clean single. Whereas normally it's pretty common to use what you call an over the shoulder shot, which is a dirty single, so that you might be looking at Harper, but you kind of frame part of the shoulder and head of James within the frame to help frame her up a little bit. And so there's aesthetically pleasing aspects to that, but there's also storytelling reasons why you might not do that and why you might do that in the first place. And so for a clean single, it drives home the idea that they are separate, they are disconnected. By keeping them in their own frames, you're kind of saying they're in their own worlds, they are not together. And they're also framed with their faces right up to the edge of the frame, so that even though she's sitting on the left and he's sitting on the right, when we're looking at her, her face is right up to the right side of that frame. Instead of creating a bunch of space between her and James, they're both close together physically, but also worlds apart. And by dramatizing that framing, right, it heightens their disconnect, because her face is right up to the edge. And it kind of says that she's at the wall. They're at an impasse. There's no future. There's no room to move forward. this is the end. And so there's a lot of, takeaways depending on the context of the scene whenever you frame someone that way, that you could, kind of imbue the characters with. And in this case, I think that's what they're saying. This is the end of the road for them. And just shoving her face to the edge of the frame that way, where she's looking to the edge of the screen, is pretty dramatic and, kind of reinforces emotionally where the relationship is at. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Story and writing. We can start with the easy stuff, and it's stuff that largely you've hinted at. But I think the lessons that he's driving home are big, and the main one is men are not held responsible by authority figures, let alone themselves. And we can see this through a couple of different venues. The cops release that guy, right? The naked stalker and trespasser. He gets set free. And that's already saying that he's not going to be punished for anything that he's done, which sucks because, I don't know how much, more sexually aggressive you can get before you get into actual assault for someone of that type, right? It's like, oh no, it wasn't enough. He's going to have to actually like rape you before we do anything about it. And even then, shrug, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. It's such an insidious and gross issue in our society. Western culture at large, I don't know about, the other cultures. I assume it's probably not too different over there, wherever else you're talking about in the world.
And I would like to add to that one of the reasons I kind of didn't like it is because probably a lot of it is true. And this is a good point, is probably just me, is probably just me just being uncomfortable with the truth of what I'm seeing, probably, to be honest, Yeah,
that's fair. It sucks to look into the mirror of our culture and say, this is the way it is. Maybe you can help, maybe you can't. All you can do is try and recognize this is the mirror of our culture, and look into it with honesty. The other thing, the interesting thing about the cop was his badge number was 1532, which I felt like this is probably a subtle Bible reference. Anytime I see big numbers like that in context of a heavily religious overtoned film, I start looking for connections with biblical, verses. And there's a lot of 1532s in the Bible. I couldn't quite drill down what the reference is. Maybe it's buried in the scene somewhere else. My best guess was Proverbs 1532, which was, those who disregard discipline despise themselves, but the one who heeds correction gains understanding. And so it's the idea that this cop is the one who's supposed to, hold discipline true. And he's not taking correction seriously. And so I don't know. There might be something else better in there with 1532, or nothing. Maybe he just really likes those numbers and told his set designer or costume wardrobe person to just stitch it in, whatever. The other authority figures not holding people responsible, that I think is much bigger, or maybe as big, but historically bigger, is the Catholic Church, via the vicar, right? Says, and we heard it in the trailer, says she should have forgiven her husband for beating her, for striking her, however you want to label it. And he's asking her, do you wonder why you drove him to it? She's like, I didn't drive him to it. Well, did you give him a chance to apologize? What? Might he still be alive if you gave him a chance to apologize? Like, she's in every way, she's being held responsible for everything she didn't do, right? The husband hit her and her job was to forgive him. And then he killed himself and her job is to find herself responsible for it. Like, this is something he did twice. These are two things he did and she's being held accountable for it. That's insanity, of course. And the larger connection here is that apparently, and this was really interesting timing, Freakonomics just put out an episode, one of the podcasts I listened to, about during the lockdowns, was there a spike in domestic violence? and exploring that question, and I'll invite you to go listen to that because there's a lot of interesting avenues that they kind of dip into. But one of the things he throws out there very lightly was the Catholic Church has a bad history of allowing men to beat their wives, to abuse women in their house, and which was deemed okay if it was to whatever, better their soul or protect their soul or some, stupid bullshit. But even in modern times, they're still largely telling women to forgive their husband. Oh, he hit you. Well, it's your job to forgive him and to not change anything. Like, it's pretty gross. And that's the tone, because I guess my understanding of Catholicism is divorce is not allowed. There are dispensations granted, but they are few and far between. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think that's the point, regardless of my views are right or wrong. I think that's the idea that Alex Garland is driving at. The Catholic Church excuses this behavior, and historically has always done so. I mean, I totally agree. And that's true. Like, divorce is not like an option in the Catholic Church. I would argue also that it's not just about the Catholic Church. It's about a man in that particular powerful position in general, right? The religious position, because we have an officer as well of the law. We have an owner of a house. We have the vicar. We have, so yes, and I totally agree with that. That is how the Catholic Church does view it, right? That's how it's always been brought up. It's not an option. And then, but to take it a step further, I just I think it's just another man in a position of power and not just power, but like a position of that allows you to be vulnerable, right? He sits down and you believe him. Like, I believed him at first. I thought, well, not when I saw him in the back of the church after she screams and he's just like staring at her and then he walks off. I'm like, oh, that's creepy. But later on, this is one of the amazing things about him. Rory Kinnear, is that, like, I believe his face when he seems to be on her side. Until he puts his hand on her leg, I'm like, wow, he's like intrigued and interested and wants to help. And I think that's also a brilliant storytelling piece from Alex that is amazing, where it brings you in as a viewer to trust this guy. He's a man of the cloth. He protects her from the kid, who's like very aggressive and seems freaky because he's wearing a mask. And then says, hey, let's talk, like wants to help her, brings her in, brings you in, and then like goes down that terrible, terrible road. But so I agree with you. I love, because I was going to bring that moment up too, when he puts his hand on her leg was an incredible moment because of the way she reacts and that she does not. Right. There are mountains of like, I don't know if I want to call it symbolism, but just reality that is just sitting right there. Because on the one hand, yes, you have an authority figure, so maybe she's not reacting because she really does trust him, and that's kind of the assumption. But maybe she's not reacting because to react would invite heightening the moment and potential violence ensuing, misinterpreting. And so there's all this tension. I'm sure, being a woman watching that was a radically different experience from me watching that, because in our culture, I'm sure there are a lot of men who feel too comfortable around women, touching them, being very handsy. And you have to decide as a woman, how do I react to this? Should I react? What's that going to mean? Is that going to make things worse? How do I escape the situation? And so I feel like there's this brief moment of discomfort before, as I'm watching her react and waiting to see what is she going to do. And none of it's there, and it makes it all the worse because I'm wanting her to react and she doesn't. And then it ultimately, I feel like, is just breeding more trust when she's allowing him this place of, confidant, right? She's responding to him. He's like, how do you feel, like haunted? She's like, yeah. And she feels like, oh, someone understands it. Someone's getting it. And from there, eventually there's this twist of the knife where it's like, nope, actually, I'm not on your side. I'm doing something completely different, and it's way worse. That's a really fascinating moment, which I'll touch back on here momentarily. So, and then she walks away, and it gets so much more creepy because he puts his hand where she was sitting to feel the warmth of her butt, and you're just like, oh, you're creepy. Rory Kinnear, really hats off to you, buddy, because that was everything you're doing in this film is so nuanced and so specific to these archetypes that we're looking at, and you just nail it.
As much as and here's the other thing, I really want to attack the Catholic Church specifically,
sure,
because I hate it. I'm passionately, I fucking hate it, because I grew up in it. I know what it's all about, and I don't care who you are. I just know, but I really want to try to look at it in a larger picture of.
Oh, sure. I think you have to do both, because interpreting the writer, you can't just ignore all the Catholic symbolism that's in here. And Christianity at large. But I think you're still right in the sense that it's still all within context of a patriarchal structure, throughout the world and throughout history. And which I think makes the Catholic Church all the more important, because they've had a large hand in that, and shaping modern day circumstances.
Maybe one of the biggest.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. And so it's all important, and, keep jumping in about the larger context for sure. So from here we can talk about symbolism. Oh God, because
here we go.
Here we go. This is symbolism overload, and this is one of the big mistakes I would call that I think he makes. There's just too much symbolism. For one, we have a lot of Christian church Catholic references, which is fine. You have Adam and Eve, right? The forbidden fruit. And it's all there on the baptismal font, that water container stone statue looking thing, right? With Adam on one side and Eve on the other. And we get a good look at Eve's baby place. And so, and then, you have on that bench scene behind the vicar, as we're looking at him in those medium shots, you have there's a cross sitting behind him, and it's laying down on the side. So there's some kind of idea that, maybe the church fell down on the job, or the church isn't as upright as it, needs to be. I don't know. It's wrong, however you want to put it. And then there's probably some light Bible verse references, in there. And of course, just blanket, forbidden fruit. Mustn't do that. Anyway, so plenty of Christianity being referenced here, right? Especially the Adam getting really bludgeoned over the face with it, with sticking leaves in his face and what have you. Okay. Then on a whole other some line of symbolism, you have all these Greek references, which I think is where you start to go astray. Homer is being referenced, right? When the vicar is in the bathroom, he starts quoting, I don't know, the Iliad. I couldn't find the prose within the Iliad, so maybe it's not. Maybe it's a kind of,
I think you're right,
his own interpretation of the Iliad. But he says something along the lines of like, bodies all around him and Agamemnon dead. And so Agamemnon obviously is a reference to the Iliad. And Agamemnon's an interesting character because he was killed by his wife. And so there's some symbolism being heaped in there. And I would guess that James is a representation of Agamemnon, James being her ex-husband. And then he says, as the vicar, I've decided you're an expert in carnality. This is the power you have. You're singing to me, not as Ulysses, but as sailor, to dash me on the rocks of this cave. And he's talking about her vagina, right? And so Ulysses is the Latin version of Odysseus, which seems unnecessarily convoluted to go from Agamemnon to Ulysses. It's a lot. And of course, this reference here is that is within the Odyssey, and the Odyssey does not contain Agamemnon, I believe. I would need like Jenny, your wife, on standby in order to like piece all this together without the internet. But I don't think Agamemnon is in the Odyssey. And this reference that he's making, that you're singing to me, not as Ulysses, but as sailor, to dash me on the rocks of this cave, is a reference to the sirens in the Odyssey. When the sirens are singing to Odysseus, right? The sirens are this Greek monster that ensnare sailors with beautiful songs in order to kill them. I'm guessing they eat them, but I don't really remember exactly what they do with their captors. Probably not what the captors are hoping for, whatever it is. Okay, and then along those same lines, we go from sirens to harpies. Not herpes, harpies. And so what is a harpy? I think Harper, her name is a reference to a harpy. And harpies were Greek mythological monsters of a bird with a human female face. So we see that this emblemized when we see the little boy place his little mask of the woman's face on the bird's head at the end, when she starts hearing the scratching coming from the kitchen, right? She walks back in and finds the little boy sitting at the counter, and he's wiggling the dead bird.
I was wondering what the hell that was.
Right.
What was going on there?
And it's a visual reference to a harpy, is my takeaway anyway. You would have to crawl inside the brain of Alex Garland or have him birth his ideas.
Ooh, please no.
Yeah. And so what are harpies? Harpies are kind of considered evil, considered destructive, but they also brought evildoers to punishment. And so they would like lift up an evildoer and bring them to whatever, the gods of Hades or something, to have their punishment exacted upon them. And so if she's a harpy, right, then she is here to bring men to their punishment, which would give some light to the very last scene that we already just talked about a second ago with James. But we're still getting to that. We're still under symbolism, Todd. Stop rushing me. And so
Say nothing.
I think, and from here, there's some other symbols that are maybe there, maybe not. I don't know. The tunnel with the echo seemed very belabored. If it didn't have some kind of symbolism to it, I couldn't tell you exactly what that symbolism is. It could be like birth canal. It could be, right, the echo, I know, had this unnaturally long life. And so maybe there's something in there. But then there's also Geoffrey's face being replicated everywhere. That's clear symbolism as a stand-in for all men, I would guess. But just in accumulating the amount of symbolism throughout this film, you have to factor that in as another piece of symbolism. There's also the dandelion seeds blowing into the wind, right? A seed, one of those seeds falls into the eye of a deer's rotting corpse. And of course, we're introduced to the dandelion blowing into the wind within like 30 seconds of the beginning, right? We see the first scene is her screaming, a reverse point of view of James falling in the window. And then we cut to the dandelion blowing into the wind. And then we cut to her driving all over the place into the countryside. And so, it's a pretty breathless, sequence of symbolism throughout this film. But then we also, towards the end, we see Adam blowing a dandelion towards her. And we see Harper inhale one of those seeds. And so dandelion seeds blowing into the wind can symbolize, I think, to me, whenever I think about it, two different things. The first one is, as kids, we would make a wish and blow on the seed, right? And that become like a wishbone kind of thing. The other version of that is semen and transpermia, or, just a reproductive, sperm, I guess. It's just kind of this very blunt forced trauma version of reproduction. And so you have that, and her inhaling one might have some symbolic representation for how we take the end sequence, which we're still not there. And then there's also some, I guess it's symbolism. It never really turns into anything, so I have to call this symbolism because it's never overtly, connected to anything else, which is the cell phone. There's all the static inserts of like Geoffrey yelling or whatever. The first time she calls her sister when she gets to the countryside house, she's on the phone with her sister and she gets all the static, and we see like inserts of Geoffrey yelling, or some guy yelling. There's no reason to not think it's Geoffrey. And then later in the film, there's all these signal interruptions when she's talking to her sister again, trying to give her the address, and she gets interrupted again. That is never fully explained. So there's no other way that I can take it other than it's symbolism. And again, this is all under the reference, my headline of symbolism overload. Like, we're just heaping too much symbolism onto the audience to really pull away anything. But that also kind of calls into the editing when you're talking about the cell phone static inserts. There's also some weird editing towards the end when she's fleeing the house to get to her car. She's escaping the bathroom, right? When the priest or the vicar is raping her or trying to rape her. It's not 100% clear what the hell is happening right there. But instead of her getting raped, she inserts a blade into his, side or stomach. I'm pretty sure it's the side, as some kind of, again, symbolic reference to Adam and the rib. So she's stabbing him in the rib, is my assumption there. And then she flees, and we see her run out the house, get into the car, but then we cut back into the house and in slow motion watch her stumble through like the hallway towards the door. And again, it's just symbolism overload. I don't really know why we're intercutting her still escaping the house as if she never left. And so you can... In
different ways. It was like she was escaping in different ways. Sometimes she would stumble, or she would stop and grab her keys or something. But it was like three different ways that they did that. I was curious. I was confused about that too.
And so you could say that part of her was raped, and this is her mental reality of her trying to escape, and she never escapes. But I don't think that works because of the very last thing that I'm going to point out. But from there, we have the birth sequence, which is another whole symbolic thing, right? It's probably pointing out how broken men create more broken men. And ultimately, it's up to women via Harper to break the sequence via the axe. Yet another symbol that is not really fleshed out into anything meaningful, other than her sister pointing at the axe and saying, I'm going to take that axe and chop his dick off, right? That's what her sister says on the phone. And so there's some symbolism that the axe represents castrating men, or at least handing out justice in your own brute way. Fine, cool, whatever. Because, yeah. And then after that, so the birth sequence seems important because men birthing men, and creating these more broken men. And if it's ultimately up to women, then when Harper's sister finally arrives, we find out that she herself is pregnant. And now it's just Harper, her pregnant sister, and there are no more men in the picture, right? They were all effectively killed off through the symbolism of Rory Kinnear playing all these men characters that were ultimately taken over by James, who we can assume was dealt with. But perhaps symbolically, also, maybe we can infer that Harper herself is pregnant. And maybe that's the symbolism of the dandelion being inhaled, cutting James out of the picture and holding that leaf. Because at the end, the last frame is her seeing her sister and she's kind of holding this little baby leaf. And so maybe that's the kind of symbolic idea that women now are in charge moving forward. Maybe the patriarchy's over. The men have been castrated and now it's time to move forward. I don't know. But there's just so much symbolism that it's just a big magpie. You know.
So yeah, I mean, it was gross and weird, but I feel like I don't know if I got it correct, but I feel like I like at first was like, what the fuck is happening during the birth scene? But then I started getting it.
Yeah.
Right. And the same thing that you just said of you know, broken men beget broken men. And that's how it's been. Right. But one other thing that I kind of got from that was it was the most broken man begetting a little bit less of a broken man, or a broken man in a different way. That's kind of what it seemed, because it was the Adam guy with all the leaves and everything on him. And then it birthed different versions of that man throughout until it got to James. And it just felt like each one was a little bit, I mean, they were broken completely, but they were a little bit less in a different way, right? So James at the end was not, he was more verbally aggressive than he was, you know, physically, like, you know, trying to rape her and things like that. So he was just sitting on the couch at the end. So, you know, it was a progression, right? And so that might be an argument for what you were, for your suggestion of now maybe this is how the patriarchy ends, right? And how women take back take the power, or take not the power, but take the guidance, right? Or the direction, capability of the future of men, right? As mothers or as wives, partners, however you want to call it. It seemed like that, because then, yeah, the man got the last word, you know, but he's wrong. So I don't know what that means, if anything, but yeah.
Yeah. So there's this fundamental disconnect between, and it's kind of repeating what you already said with James. So that whole final sequence, right? Adam returns and his face is now exactly like the baptismal font that we see, you know, throughout the film, and they intercut it, you know, still looking at it in this kind of blood red lighting, and maybe even blood overflowing onto it. I don't remember. There's so many things happening. And he gives birth to the boy. The boy births the priest. The priest births in the doorway through his spine, Geoffrey, and then Geoffrey's ankle is broken, right? And then he cries and he births James through his mouth, feet first. I didn't really watch it the first time because I will say the visual effects were absolutely incredible. Like, oh man, that deserves an award for sure.
Absolutely.
I don't know if anything else does. Well, maybe some of the acting. Rory Kinnear probably deserves a nod somewhere along the line. And so he comes out feet first, and then James, of course, sits on the couch, right? Broken foot, arm spliced, much like
not pregnant,
much like he was the way she last saw him, right? Impaled by the fence, and sits on the couch with her and says, "This is what you did," still not owning his own decisions. And she asks him, right, what do you want from me? Your love. And then she holds an axe and thinks. And from there, the real question is, was this all real? And I think we have to say yes, because when the sister arrives, the car is there damaged, right? There's this bloody trail going in to the house. And so the only real conclusion is that we have to say it all really happened. And yeah, I don't know. I think I've punched myself out at this point.
No, I know. I think there's just so many ways that you could look at it. It feels real. It feels like the point of it was conjecture, right?
Yeah.
How do you feel? What do you think it's about?
I think I'm not opposed to this heavy level of symbolism. I think he mixed too many metaphors too deeply. It's one thing to make a Shakespeare reference, like, oh, this house is at least 500 years old, like Shakespeare, or pre, like it could have been, before Shakespeare's time. I think that's one thing, right? It's another thing to start quoting Romeo and Juliet and then also quoting, or symbolizing Adam and Eve. And then, and he didn't quote Romeo and Juliet. I'm just saying you wouldn't want to do that. It's one thing to reference Shakespeare. It's another thing to dive deep into Shakespeare. Like, he went heavy on Greek mythology in all kinds of directions. He went heavy on Christian mythology, and I think this is interesting, just as a complete side rant, that we don't call it Christian mythology yet, right? We call Greek stuff mythology. We don't call it Greek religion. And
right.
The only difference really is the amount of people who practice these things.
Who practice it, exactly.
Yeah.
Is it mythology? Well,
yeah.
if you deem it fake now,
that's right,
or not real now.
So you have all this Christian mythos heavily steeped in the film, along with all this Greek mythology heavily steeped, and then along that Greek, mythos like the Harpy. You also have, it's so much mythology. I think it works far better whenever you have a strong story that has all these references in it, because you can't enjoy this movie. I could probably just stop there. You can't enjoy this movie.
Yeah.
It's not a movie to be enjoyed. But if you have a really strong through line where the story works on its own, and then and any audience member can walk away saying, man, that story really punched me when XYZ happened. And then nerds like you and I can walk away and say, man, that story was really good. Did you catch the symbolism of Eve and how she was a representation of Eve and taking back the garden, right? Or whatever. Like, instead, this movie is, you cannot appreciate it except through the lens of symbolism. And you really can't. I don't think you can watch this movie and love it without like really heavily being invested in the symbolism of it all. And I mean, to each their own. If you love this movie for those things, kudos to you. That's going to be a fraction of your audience, as opposed to most people really want to connect with the story first and foremost, and then peel back the layers. This is all onion, no layer. And it's not good for that reason. And I would liken it as opposed to something like Denis Villeneuve, Enemy, where it's like, man, you can enjoy that on its surface, but it's still going to punch you in the face with some really heavy symbolism that's going to make you like wrinkle your brain trying to figure out what you just saw. But it still emotionally all works really, really well on a surface level. This movie does not work on a surface level at all to me and to my two viewings, which I didn't want to go back for a second viewing, but I felt like I needed to in order to try and like I was practicing stenography, in my seat where I was just writing every single thing down. Like I may have wrote the screenplay on my Alamo napkin. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the last thing I'll say is it's obviously about toxic masculinity. It's about the evolution of that. It's about the levels of that. And I get it, but I totally agree with you. I think the symbolism is just all over the place, and it's constantly changing too and evolving. And so, like you mentioned enemy earlier, I think the symbolism there is steady throughout, right? And that's the difference between the two. There's a lot there, but it's steady. Here, there's a lot, but it's constantly evolving and changing. Maybe that's the point also. And maybe, to your point at the very beginning of this, he's just sick and tired of Hollywood in general and of making movies just for, like to be critically acclaimed or to be, to be understood. Maybe the point of this is to have these conversations, and it's like, I'm going to make a movie that I don't care if anybody likes. It's just whatever it, explodes out of me, births out of me, and, to make a pun, there, pun intended. And maybe that's the point, and if that's the case, sure, I get it. It's just, I wouldn't want to watch it a second time, for sure. But I think, and that's so frustrating, because I think a movie like this is necessary. I said at the beginning, sometimes there's a lot of like, anti man, stuff that's around, and that's fine to a point. But I think, a story like this, where you're trying to get across a point of toxic masculinity, I think it needs to be better. I mean, it needs to be like, yes, it's direct, but it's all over the place, and so I feel like it should be done better, so that it gets to a wider audience, and that can actually get out there in a way that's digestible to millions more, because it's important. I don't want to diminish that. I want to say, I know it exists, and I know we need to do better as men. Absolutely. But this ain't the way to do it, I feel like.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, whatever he wanted to say, the message gets lost whenever you bury it so deeply into, symbolic things. So if you want people to walk away with a nice lesson about men, like, don't bludgeon us behind the back, over the head. Like, look us in the eye and then punch us. But I mean, regardless, I'm still excited about whatever he puts out next. But there is something interesting that happens when I watch, this or some other films of people I respect, which is this, if it bleeds, we can kill it. Like,
yes. Oh, he is human.
Yeah. It's nice to be reminded that, even my heroes, are imperfect. And, even if they're executing like at a really high level, it's still, there's room. And so I'm like, okay, you know what? I don't feel bad if I take a swing and I miss. The important part is to take your swings. And I hope to God Alex Garland keeps making movies. I want to keep seeing him make shows. Devs was incredible, but I want to see him, keep making films that stand alone and these nice hour and a half to 2 hour, sequences.
Agreed. I think that's his strong suit, for sure.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. What are you going to recommend this week?
Yeah. Do you want to guess?
My guess was Slumdog Millionaire.
No, why
I don't know.
would you guess that? That's just random guess. That's a good guess, I guess. Right. But no, I'm going to recommend, I just finished the first half of it. I'm going to recommend Stranger Things 4. Really enjoyed it. Yep. I don't want to say anything about it.
Yeah,
but
we can talk
I like
about
what they've done.
I think we can talk about that after we hop off. Nice. I'm going to recommend this movie called The One I Love. It's by Charlie McDaniels. This was a weird experience and frustrating experience for me. I was following this guy on Twitter for years. And it was this random dude that had this Twitter account called the girls upstairs above me, the girls who live above me, or something like that. And it was this guy who lived in LA, was going to school, and the walls in his apartment were incredibly thin. And so he could just hear what, the women, these two college girls living above him, would say. And they would just say outrageously dumb things.
Oh my gosh,
and
that's
it was
amazing.
Freaking hysterical. And he might tack on some little, comment about it, which usually wasn't that funny. But the things that they would say, he pointed out, were just unbelievably funny. And then one day out of the blue, he says, "Hey, check out my new movie called The One I Love." And I was like, oh God, some rando made a movie. And then I pull up the trailer, and it's got like Mark Duplass and Elizabeth Moss. And I'm like, wait, what? What? And then I watched the trailer, and it looked incredible. And I was like, this can't be happening. I'm just walking in the wilderness right now. And this random account made an incredible movie with Duplass and Elizabeth Moss. And so I went and watched it, and it was excellent. It's a great, great little indie film by Charlie McDowell. I think I just said McDaniel. I think it's Charlie McDowell. Sorry, I probably should have looked that up. But I want to say he's the son of, I'm going to double check before I butcher this, Mary Steenburgen. Yes, Mary Steenburgen and Malcolm McDowell, two Hollywood heavyweights. And so not to say that that's why he got his break, though I'm sure it doesn't hurt.
Didn't hurt.
Yeah.
Yep.
But regardless, the script is phenomenal, and he directed the absolute hell out of it. And so if you want a nice abstract indie film that really packs a punch, it's a small film, but it's brilliant. I highly, highly recommend The One I Love. Yeah. I won't tell you what it's about.
Wow, is it streaming somewhere? I would like to see it.
I think it's streaming on Netflix the last time I checked. Okay. I will double check right now. And it is streaming, on HBO Max. It was streaming on HBO, Netflix for a bit, but now it's on HBO. And so, yeah, it's fantastic. I think you will really enjoy it. And I would recommend, don't look up anything. It's about two people who go for marriage counseling. It's got Ted Danson as their marriage counselor. And it's
my gosh.
Yeah. He just knocked it out of the park. And so I don't think you should look up anything beyond that. It's a very intimate film. It's so good.
Okay.
Yeah. So stay tuned for, we have a short spotlight this week. There's an awesome musician on YouTube called The Interloper, and he made a film, or a new track called "Making Up Is the Best Part." Todd, what do you know about this?
I guess it's me. Yeah. So I sometimes make synth tracks on my synthesizers and put them out. And when I'm feeling froggy, feel like I got something that's interesting or whatever. And yeah, that was the most recent one that I did, I guess a couple weeks ago. And yeah, it's just a fun little thing. I have a few others on there too, but I'm going to start posting more for sure.
Nice.
So, thank you, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Check that out. I'll embed it in the show notes, which you can find at thepestlepodcast.com/min. But stay tuned for next week. And we're gonna do a user request. There's another film that I was thinking about doing. We'll do it after that. I need a palate cleanser.
I agree.
And so we're gonna cleanse the palates with some Marvel goodness. We're gonna look at Captain America: Civil War. This was a listener request. Who requested this one?
I forgot.
For shame.
Shoot. For shame.
Forgot. I'll edit that part out.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I just don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that. And if you're enjoying the show, don't forget, subscribe, drop us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to our podcast, and leave us a note if there's something you want us to talk about, kinds of things you find interesting, or if you just want to rave about all things men and how we get it wrong and how we just mansplained for the last hour about men. let us know what you really think, politely. and of course, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/men.
Annalise, that's who recommended. Annalise recommended Captain America: Civil War. So
Nice, cool.
Just remember that.
Thanks.
So our quote of the day, this is a good one from J.K. Rowling. This is right up our alley that we talk about all the time that you mentioned earlier. Ultimately, wouldn't you rather be the person who actually finished the project you're dreaming about rather than the one who talks about always having wanted to? And that's just a great way of saying the same thing, which is, you only live once. If there's something you want to do, find a way to do it. And what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, it makes me think of this too, is that perfection is the enemy of good, which means you work really hard to make it as good as you possibly can. But at the end of the day, you just have to do it. You just have to do it. Actually doing it is more important. Taking steps to do it is more important than making it perfect. I think that if you, to the point of that Quentin Tarantino has a great saying, and I don't know how true it actually is, but I like hearing it, which is, if you love, and he's talking about cinema, but I think it goes with anything. If you love cinema, if you love movies, and it is your life, and it is, you absolutely adore it, you cannot help but make a great movie. And I don't know how accurate that is. I think you can still make a shitty movie, even if you love film or filmmaking. But I think that the point there is that it will make you take action. It will make you actually do it. And I think this is a great quote that states that in an interesting way.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it can feel a little easy to hear someone like J.K. Rowling or Stephen King say, "Hey, man, just do it," because they had this large body of brilliant work. But it's also encouraging because, to me, it's also hinting at her own, hurdles that she had to get over. It's easy to have done something. It's really hard to say you want to do something when everyone that I know always wants to have done something. The doing is the hardest part, man. Running a marathon is not nearly as fun as having run a marathon.
Well said.
It's just pain, it's agony. And with art, it's just debilitating at times to say, am I failing? Am I getting it wrong? And ultimately maybe, but there's only one way that you're going to find out. And it's by finishing it and doing it. So wherever you're at in your creative process, just step out, try it, do it. It's better to find out and instead of just dreaming and wishing and hoping. Yeah.
And the easiest way to think about this also, to me, is the idea of falling in love with the process rather than the result. If you love the process, then that's a much easier thing, because you're not thinking, how do I get to the end? How do I make this thing? You have no idea. You have no idea. Don't worry about the end. Worry about the decision you're making right now, and loving that process. I mean, Kobe Bryant is like a absolute. He was a subscriber to this. Love the process, because that's the dream. The actual making the movie is the dream. When it's done, then you just have a movie. What then? Okay, you move on to the next one. But if you love the process of it, then all of a sudden it's like, I'm getting to do my dream, which is making films. I think that's my favorite, part about why I love what I do. It's like, people sometimes ask, what my favorite part of the process is, and I love it all. I love creating. I love outlining. I spend a lot of time in each phase, and I really enjoy every phase because just dreaming up new ideas is really fun. And then figuring out, like, how does it all structure and play together? That's really fun. And then figuring out how to make these things reality, how to cast it, and how to bring people together. And then you get to be on set, and that's really fun. That's its own world. Post-production is really fun because you get to see it all kind of come together. And then I think the least fun part is actually putting it out. Like,
I want as little to do with that part of the process as possible. I like creating. I want to stay in this other phase of, thinking and creating and finishing, and moving on to, like you just said, and then you get to move on to the next thing.
I'm very much looking forward to working on your film.
Yeah.
Very much looking forward to that.
Yeah, that, like I said, it's agony and it's debilitating.
Yeah, but that's the point, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Terrified.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining us. This was a very interesting episode. I don't even know what to say about it. Like Wes said, make sure to subscribe, review us on iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Make a suggestion. If there's a film that you'd like us to cover, please suggest it. Maybe we'll do it. And share us with your friends. All of that helps a ton. We really appreciate it. Until next week, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.